The morning my life almost ended began like every other morning. My name is Helen Whitmore. I was 64 years old, widowed, living alone, and doing my best to stay invisible in a world that no longer seemed to notice women like me. That Tuesday I woke before sunrise, made a cup of weak coffee, and stared at the empty chair across from me. My husband Robert had been gone for nearly 2 years, yet the silence still felt new every single day. Silence has weight, no one ever tells you that. I left my small apartment just after 7, locking the door behind me without knowing it might be the last time I would ever do so. The bus ride to work was quiet. I got off 2 stops early like I always did to walk the rest of the way. My doctor said it helped my joints. The truth was, I needed the air. I needed the movement. I needed to feel like I still belonged somewhere. That was when I noticed him. The homeless man who sat on the bench outside the library every morning was standing up instead. Something about him was different. His calm was gone. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the street, his body tense. When he saw me, he moved fast. He grabbed my arm with a strength that startled me. "Helen," he said in a low voice, urgent and steady, "you need to listen to me." My heart began to race. "Do not go home tonight. Not be careful. Not watch your back. Do not go home tonight." Standing there on that cold sidewalk, beside a man everyone else walked past, I felt something settle deep in my bones. Fear. The kind that tells you your life is about to change forever. Before that morning, before the warning that would change everything, my life had already been quietly falling apart. I had been married to Robert Whitmore for 42 years. We met young, built a life slowly, and believed we would grow old together in the same house we raised our children in. Robert was steady, responsible. He handled the finances, the paperwork, the decisions that scared me. I trusted him completely. When he got sick, everything happened fast. Hospital stays, surgeries, medications with names I could barely pronounce. I sat beside his bed holding his hand, telling myself love was enough to get us through. It was not. Robert died 18 months later, and with him went the life I thought was secure. The medical bills drained our savings, the insurance barely covered the funeral. The accounts I thought were safe were already empty. Grief is not loud at first, it is quiet, it waits. Our daughter lived across the country, busy with her career. Our son had a family of his own, and worries he never spoke about. They loved me, I know they did, but love from a distance feels thin when you are alone at night. I sold the house we had lived in for 3 decades. Every room felt like a goodbye. I packed my life into boxes and moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of St. Paul, Minnesota. The first night there, I sat on the bed surrounded by unpacked boxes and realized no one knew where I was. No one would notice if I stayed silent for days. At 64, I was starting over in a world that did not make space for women my age. I was no longer a wife, no longer a priority, just another older woman trying not to disappear. That fear followed me everywhere. To the bus stop. To the grocery store. To bed each night. I told myself I did not need much, just a job, just a routine, just a reason to wake up in the morning. I had no idea how close I already was to losing everything again. Finding a job at 64 was humbling in ways I was not prepared for. I had not worked outside the home in years, my skills were outdated, my body was slower. My confidence was fragile. I filled out applications anyway, sitting at my small kitchen table, telling myself rejection was better than regret. Most places never called back. Then the Lakeshore Senior Support Center did. They needed a part-time receptionist, 25 hours a week, nothing fancy, answer phones, greet clients, file paperwork. The pay was modest, but when the director shook my hand and said they valued reliability and kindness, I felt something loosen in my chest. I started the following Monday. Every morning I took the bus across town. I always got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way. My doctor said walking would help my joints, but the truth was simpler. I needed time to breathe before facing the day. The center was small but warm. Elderly clients came for meals, activities, and company. Some moved slowly. Some repeated the same stories. Some just wanted someone to listen. I understood them more than I liked to admit. The job gave my days shape again. A reason to shower. A reason to put on clean clothes. A reason to speak to another human being. I did my work quietly and well. I did not ask questions. I did not draw attention. I believed if I kept my head down, life might finally leave me alone. On my walk from the bus stop to the center, I passed the public library every morning. There was a bench near the entrance, worn smooth from years of use. At first, I barely noticed the man who sat there. I had no idea he would become the most important person in my life. He sat on the same bench every morning, just outside the public library. An older man with gray hair and a weathered face, wearing a faded jacket no matter the season. He did not hold a sign. He did not call out to anyone. He simply sat there, hands folded, watching the world move past him as if he were part of the scenery. Most people never looked at him. At first, neither did I. I was focused on my own thoughts, my own worries, counting my steps and reminding myself not to limp. But after a few weeks I began to notice the details. The way he nodded politely at people who passed. The way he sat up straight, even on the coldest mornings. The quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. Something about him felt familiar. One morning, without planning to, I stopped. I reached into my purse, pulled out a few dollars, and placed them gently beside him. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. He looked up at me then, his eyes kind and clear. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "God bless you." His voice was calm, steady, and unexpectedly warm. I walked away with tears in my eyes and no clear reason why. After that, it became routine. Some mornings I gave him $5, some mornings just loose change, some mornings only a smile and a greeting, but I always stopped. We began to talk. His name was Walter Hayes. He was 76 years old. He had been a high school teacher for most of his life, teaching history and civics to teenagers, who never realized how much he cared. He asked about my job, about my children, about how I was managing on my own. No one had asked me those questions in a long time. In a strange way, the man on the bench became my friend. And I became his. Over time, Walter began to share his story with me, not all at once but in small pieces, like memories he had learned to carry carefully. He had been married for over 40 years. His wife passed away suddenly, and after that, his life unraveled faster than anyone could have imagined. He trusted the wrong people. A financial advisor who promised to protect his retirement instead emptied it. By the time Walter realized what had happened, the money was gone and so was the man who took it. Without his pension, everything else collapsed. The apartment he had lived in for decades was sold when the building was converted into condominiums. The rent tripled overnight. Walter packed what he could carry and left with nowhere to go. He told me this without bitterness. That was what hurt the most. This was a man who had spent his life teaching children about responsibility, fairness, and citizenship. He had stood in front of classrooms every day believing that doing the right thing mattered. Now he slept wherever there was space, shelters when he was lucky, the street when he was not. I felt anger rise in me every time he spoke. Not anger at him, but at a system that let a good man disappear so easily, at how quickly respect vanished once someone no longer had an address. "You should not be out here," I told him one cold morning. "You should have a home." Walter only smiled. "I had a good life, Helen," he said, "and I still have my mind. That counts for something." But it did not feel like enough. Not to me. Somewhere between those conversations, I realized our friendship was no longer casual. We were two people who had lost everything in different ways, meeting each other in the middle of quiet mornings. Neither of us knew how much that connection was about to matter. The morning Walter warned me, the air felt different. The sky was low and gray, the kind of morning that presses down on your chest without explanation. I stepped off the bus and headed toward the library, already thinking about the day ahead. Phones to answer, names to remember, smiles to give. Walter was not sitting on the bench. He was standing near it, pacing, his hands clenched at his sides. When he saw me, his face tightened with something I had never seen before. Fear. He crossed the distance between us quickly and caught my arm. "Helen," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "You are hurting me," I started to say, but he shook his head. "There is something wrong at your job." I froze. "What do you mean?" "I cannot explain everything right now," he said, "but people are stealing money, donation money, and someone thinks you know more than you do." My heart began to pound. Walter, I am just the receptionist. That is why you are dangerous to them, he said quietly. You see things, you hear things, and they think you are watching. He leaned closer. Do not look at the records, do not ask questions, do not act differently. Then he said the words that changed everything. Do not go home tonight? Sleep somewhere else, a motel, a friend, anywhere but your apartment. I stared at him, my mind scrambling for logic. How do you know any of this? People talk around men like me, Helen, he said. They forget I am listening. There was no panic in his eyes now, only certainty. Promise me. I did not understand him. I did not know if I believed him. But I nodded. I promise. Walter released my arm and stepped back, already retreating into the role the world expected of him. He sat down on the bench, folded his hands, and became invisible again. I stood there shaking, knowing one thing for certain. Whatever was coming, I was already part of it. The walk from the library to the senior center felt longer than usual that morning. Walter's words echoed in my head with every step. Stealing money, donation records. Someone thinking I knew too much. I kept telling myself he was mistaken, that fear had filled in the gaps of his imagination, but a tight knot had already formed in my stomach. The Lakeshore Senior Support Center was busy when I arrived. Clients lined up at the desk, voices overlapping, coats draped over chairs. I smiled, greeted them by name, and answered the phones like I always did. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The director of the center, Linda Carver, stepped out of her office just before noon. She had run the place for over a decade and was well respected by staff and donors alike. She stopped at my desk and lowered her voice. Helen, can I ask you something? Of course. Have you noticed anything unusual lately with our donations? Any complaints or confusion from donors? My heart skipped. No, I said carefully, nothing that I can think of. Why? She waved a hand as if brushing away the concern. Probably nothing. One donor said her receipt did not match what she remembered giving. Emily is checking into it. Emily Ross was the new bookkeeper, young, efficient, always smiling. Everyone liked her. Linda thanked me and walked away, leaving the knot in my stomach tighter than before. It was too specific to be coincidence. The rest of the day dragged. Every time Emily passed through the lobby, I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She laughed with coworkers. She chatted with clients. She looked exactly like someone with nothing to hide. But Walter had told me not to ask questions. So I did not. By late afternoon, my nerves were frayed. When 5 o'clock finally came, I gathered my things and headed for the door. Helen, Linda called after me. Before you go, could you stop by my office for a minute? My heart dropped. I followed her down the hallway, already wondering if this was the moment everything unraveled. Or the moment I became their next problem. Linda closed the door to her office and gestured for me to sit. I remained standing for a moment, my pulse loud in my ears, before lowering myself into the chair across from her desk. She folded her hands neatly, her expression calm, almost gentle. Helen, she said, I need to talk to you about something confidential. The words sent a chill through me. She explained there had been irregularities in the donation records, missing funds, an outside auditor, possible police involvement. She spoke carefully, as if choosing each word with purpose. I listened without interrupting, my face neutral, my mind racing. Someone has been stealing from us, Linda said. We are trying to determine who. She looked directly at me. You have been here long enough to notice patterns. I need to know if you have seen anything unusual. Walter's voice echoed in my head. Do not ask questions. Do not act differently. I shook my head slowly. I am just the receptionist, I said. I do not have access to the financial systems. Linda studied me for a moment, then smiled. Of course, I just wanted to be sure. She dismissed me a few minutes later. I left her office with shaking hands, certain of one thing. They were looking for someone to blame. I did not go home. Instead, I checked into a small motel a mile from my apartment and lay awake listening to traffic outside the window. Around 2 in the morning, my phone rang. A police officer told me there had been a fire in my building. It started on my floor. If I had gone home that night, I would have been asleep in that apartment. And I would not have woken up. I did not sleep after that call. When morning came, I took a taxi straight to the library. My hands shook the entire ride. I kept replaying the officer's words in my head. A fire, my floor, my apartment. Walter was already there. He stood up the moment he saw me, his face pale, his eyes searching mine. When he realized I was unharmed, his shoulders sagged with relief. "You are alive," he said softly, "thank God." I grabbed his hands before I could stop myself. "You knew," I said. "You knew something was going to happen." He nodded once. "Come sit, Helen." We sat on the bench where he spent his days. He reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind children use for school. Its pages were bent and filled with tight handwriting. "People forget I am here," he said. "They talk like no one is listening." He opened the notebook and pointed to dates and times. For weeks I watched, I listened. 2 men met near this bench more than once. They talked about money being moved. Donation money. They mentioned the senior center. My chest tightened. Then, he continued, they talked about a problem. An older woman. A receptionist. Someone who might notice things. I felt sick. Last night, those same men talked about a fire. About making it look like an accident. They said your name, Helen. They said your apartment number. He reached deeper into his jacket and pulled out an old phone. "I followed them once," he said. "I could not hear everything, but I took pictures." He handed me the phone. On the screen was a grainy image I recognized instantly. Linda Carver. Standing beside her was a tall man with sharp features, strangers in another photo, faces I had never seen. "She told you about the theft because she was preparing to blame you," Walter said quietly. "If you died in that fire, the story would end there." The weight of it crushed me. "I am not a smart man anymore, Helen," he said, pressing the notebook into my hands. "But I know right from wrong, and I know when someone needs protecting." In that moment, I understood something that changed me forever. The man the world ignored had been watching closely enough to save my life. We went to the police that same morning. I brought Walter's notebook, the phone, and everything he had carefully gathered while the rest of the world walked past him. At first, the officers listened politely but cautiously. Stories like ours did not usually come from people like Walter. But evidence does not care who delivers it. The dates in the notebook matched financial records. The faces in the photos matched security footage. The conversations Walter overheard lined up with transactions that should never have happened. Within days, investigators were at the Lakeshore Senior Support Center. Computers were seized. Accounts were frozen. Staff members were interviewed. Linda Carver was arrested at her desk. The truth came out faster than I expected. Linda had been skimming donation money for years, funneling it through accounts controlled by her brother. Emily Ross was family, brought in to help manage the paperwork and keep everything quiet. When donors started asking questions, they needed a way out. They needed someone small, someone believable. They chose me. The fire was not an accident. Investigators found proof of arson and traced it back to Linda's brother. He had been paid to make it look like an electrical failure. I testified weeks later. My voice shook, but I told the truth. Walter testified too, wearing a borrowed suit, standing tall, speaking with the calm authority of a man who had once taught classrooms full of children. There was no shouting, no celebration, no hatred. Just facts. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Justice did not arrive with anger or revenge. It arrived quietly, carried by truth, patience, and a man the world refused to see. And for the first time in a long while, I felt safe again. After the trial ended and the headlines faded, I went looking for Walter. The bench outside the library was empty. At first, I told myself he was resting somewhere warm, finally free from worry. But when days passed and no one had seen him, a familiar fear crept in, the kind that settles deep in your chest and refuses to leave. I checked the shelters. I asked around the library. No one knew where he was. 3 days later, I found him in a hospital room. Walter had collapsed on the street from dehydration and exhaustion. Years of untreated illness had finally caught up with him. The doctor explained that his kidneys were failing and that he had been living with diabetes for a long time without medication. I sat beside his bed and held his hand, the same hand that had once pulled me out of danger. "Do not cry, Helen," he said softly when he saw my tears. "I did what anyone should do." "But not everyone would have," I said. I could not accept that saving my life would cost him his. I spent the next weeks fighting for him with a determination I did not know I still had. I called social services. I contacted legal aid. I filled out forms, made appointments, and refused to be polite when politeness led nowhere. I told Walter's story to anyone who would listen: a retired teacher, a victim of fraud, a man who had been forgotten. People listened. A nonprofit stepped in to help with housing. A doctor agreed to oversee his treatment. A lawyer offered to help recover part of his lost pension. Walter watched all of this quietly, disbelief written across his face. "You do not have to do this," he said more than once. "Yes, I do," I answered. "You did not walk away from me. I will not walk away from you." For the first time since my husband died, I felt something stronger than fear. Purpose. By early summer, Walter was no longer a patient. He was a resident. The nonprofit housing organization found him a small, clean apartment not far from the library. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a door that locked, a bed of his own, and windows that let in the morning light. On move-in day, I watched him sit in the middle of the living room, surrounded by donated furniture and boxes of books people had given him once they heard his story. He looked around slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. "I never thought I would have a place again," he said quietly. "You always deserved one," I told him. His health began to improve. With proper medication and regular meals, the sharpness in his eyes returned. His hands steadied, his voice grew stronger. Not long after, the local library asked if he would be willing to volunteer. 2 afternoons a week, Walter sat at a small table helping children with homework. History, civics, the same subjects he had taught for decades. I watched from a distance the first time, listening to him explain patience, fairness, and responsibility with the same calm authority he once had in the classroom. He had found his way back. And somehow, so had I. My children started calling more often, not out of guilt but interest. They wanted to know how I was doing, what I was working on, who this remarkable man was that had become part of my life. I realized then that kindness does not disappear into nothing. It moves. It spreads. It returns. All of this began because I stopped one morning, because I chose to see a man everyone else walked past. A small decision. A single ripple. And 2 lives forever changed. I am 65 now. Life did not return to what it once was, but it became something quieter and stronger. I still work at a senior center, a different one now. I pay closer attention. I ask careful questions. I protect myself in ways I never knew I needed to before. Every morning I still take the bus, I still walk the last few stops, and a few times a week, I stop by Walter's apartment. We drink coffee together and talk about the news, about books, about the strange turns life can take when you least expect them. People often ask me what I learned from everything that happened. They expect warnings about danger, or speeches about corruption and betrayal. But that is not my answer. What I learned is this: kindness matters. Every time you stop instead of walking past, every time you listen instead of ignoring, every time you treat someone with dignity when the world tells you they are invisible, you create something powerful. You create ripples. You never know who is watching, you never know whose life you might be changing, and you never know when that kindness might come back to save your own. If this story moved you, please like and share it. Write in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment. And if you want more real-life stories about resilience, justice, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest choices make the biggest difference.